25 hours a week, my daughter-in-law said, sliding a printed childcare schedule across my own kitchen table. No question asked, no thank you offered. Just a set of rules dictating my retirement. So, I folded the paper, changed my locks, raised their rent, and let them find out what happens when Grandma decides to take her life back. I thought we were just having a casual cup of coffee when my daughter-in-law, Victoria, slid that printed piece of paper across the table. "We've officially added you to our childcare calendar," she said, her voice dripping with an authority that left absolutely no room for discussion. It wasn't a request. It was a corporate directive. I looked down at the sheet sitting on my kitchen island. It was a highly detailed spreadsheet dictating 25 hours of my week. 25 hours of unpaid labor, without anyone bothering to ask me first, and without a single word of appreciation. Right underneath it lay a 2-page document, a formal nanny contract outlining strict expectations and behavioral guidelines for me to follow. The absolute kicker was that this entire scene was unfolding inside my own house. A house whose mortgage I was still painstakingly paying off month after month with my modest widow's pension. While my son, Caleb, and his wife, Victoria, lived in the upstairs apartment practically rent-free. I looked over at Caleb, my own flesh and blood. He instantly averted his eyes, staring intently at the hardwood floor, completely incapable of standing up to his wife or defending his own mother. Victoria smiled at me coldly, as if she had just handed me some grand privilege. "It really is the best setup for everyone, Mom," she added smoothly. "This gives us a solid structure, and it gives you a meaningful routine for your retirement." In that exact moment, I didn't feel rage or sorrow. Instead, a wave of icy clarity washed over me. I finally realized that my years of generosity had been completely mistaken for weakness. They didn't see me as a loving grandmother to turn to for help. They saw me as a free, live-in utility worker who had nothing better to do. I took the paper, folded it up neatly and deliberately, and slipped it into my cardigan pocket. I didn't yell, and I didn't cry. I simply stood up, poured the rest of my coffee down the sink, and looked at them. My silence seemed to make Victoria nervous for the very first time. She had no idea that this quiet moment was the exact second she lost all control. I walked out of the kitchen and into my living room, completely determined to shift the entire dynamic starting tomorrow morning. I slept incredibly well that night. No anxious thoughts kept me awake, because the plan was already perfectly clear in my mind. When I woke up the next morning, I enjoyed my morning tea in absolute peace while watching the backyard birds. For years, I had bent over backwards trying to keep everyone happy. Caleb and Victoria had moved into the upper unit to save up money for a down payment on their own house. That was 4 years ago. Since then, they paid a laughably small $350 flat rate for utilities, while I shouldered the massive burden of rising property taxes and soaring electric bills. They had grown incredibly comfortable with the luxury of cheap living, using me for absolutely everything. That era was officially over. My first errand that morning wasn't checking in upstairs. It was a direct trip to the local hardware store. I picked out a high-end, heavy-duty smart lock for my front door on the main floor. Until now, Caleb and Victoria had a key to my place and used it whenever they pleased. They would walk right in, drop off their laundry, or rifle through my fridge for groceries. My privacy had completely vanished. Back home, I pulled out my old toolbox, My late husband had made sure I knew how to handle basic home maintenance. It took less than 20 minutes to pop the old deadbolt out and secure the new lock in place. When I turned the key and heard that solid, heavy click, a profound sense of relief washed over me. I finally owned my own living space again. Shortly after lunch, I heard footsteps echoing in the stairwell. Someone turned the doorknob to my apartment and rattled it impatiently. It was Victoria, expecting to breeze right in as usual to give me my marching orders for the week. But the door held firm, and a shocked, disbelief-filled silence suddenly fell over the hallway. I walked slowly to the door, opened it just a crack, and looked at her bewildered face. She was holding the heavy diaper bag, completely prepared to hand over my grandson without a single word. I stayed perfectly calm, waiting to see what she would say next. "Your key isn't working," Victoria said, her voice sharp and accusatory as she stared at the gleaming new hardware. Her tone made it sound like I had committed a federal crime. I opened the door a fraction wider, stepping into the frame, and gave her a polite but completely distant smile. "I changed the locks." "Victoria," I replied calmly, "it's important for my peace of mind and my privacy. Moving forward, I don't want anyone entering my home unannounced." Victoria let out a scoff. "We're family. And what about the childcare schedule? Tomorrow is Monday, and you're supposed to take the baby starting at 8 o'clock sharp. It's right there in the agreement." I glanced down at my sweet, sleeping grandson in his car seat and felt a momentary tug at my heartstrings. But I held my ground. I never agreed to that contract, nor did I sign it. Tomorrow, I have my own plans. Before she could fire back, I wished her a wonderful Sunday and smoothly closed the door. I could hear her stomp her foot out in the hall before storming back up the stairs to their apartment. A few minutes later, the muffled sound of a heated argument drifted down from upstairs. She was absolutely ripping into Caleb. I felt a pang of pity for my son, but he desperately needed to learn how to take accountability for his own life and his own family. I walked over to my desk and pulled out our original housing arrangement papers. Caleb and Victoria were occupying the entire top floor without a single piece of a formal, written lease. We had done everything on a verbal agreement and a handshake. They were paying next to nothing while I was practically subsidizing their lifestyle. I sat down, pulled out a clean sheet of paper, and began drafting an official notice. It was time to introduce them to the harsh economic realities of the real world. I sealed the envelope carefully, first thing tomorrow. Before they even poured their morning cereal, they were going to realize that a brand new chapter had begun, and I was the one writing the rules. On Monday morning, I was up by 6. I threw on my best hiking gear, packed a solid trail backpack, and filled a thermos with hot tea. Over the weekend, I had spontaneously signed up for a local outdoors club that spent every Monday exploring the state park trails. At exactly 7:45, I stepped out of my apartment door into the shared entryway. Right on cue, the upstairs door clicked open, and Victoria started hurrying down the stairs. She was dressed in her full corporate attire, balancing the baby on one hip and clutching a massive diaper bag. When her eyes hit me, she stopped dead in her tracks. Her gaze darted frantically from my hiking boots up to my backpack. "What on earth do you think you're doing?" she asked, her voice reaching a frantic pitch. "You are supposed to take the baby in 15 minutes. I have a massive quarterly presentation at the office." I stood my ground, keeping my breathing steady, and looked her dead in the eye. "I told you yesterday that I had my own plans today. Victoria, I'm heading out for a day on the trails." Her face flushed an angry red. Are you kidding me right now? You can't just leave us high and dry like this. We completely built our schedule around you, who is supposed to watch your grandson. I didn't feel a single ounce of granny guilt. You should have had a conversation with me instead of trying to budget my time for me, I said softly but firmly. I stepped right past her, opened the front door, and walked out into the crisp morning air. It felt absolutely exhilarating to just walk away. I spent the entire day out in nature, laughing with wonderful people and leaving the toxic drama far behind. When I finally returned late that afternoon, pleasantly tired but deeply happy, I found Caleb sitting alone on the front porch steps. He was holding the official letter I had slipped into their mailbox that morning, and the look on his face told me everything I needed to know. Caleb looked completely exhausted as he stood up. He followed me silently into my apartment after I unlocked the door. I didn't offer him a drink or try to play the doting mother. I sat straight down at the kitchen table. He placed my letter right in front of him. It was a formal notification of a utility adjustment and a strict requirement to sign a standard rental lease within 2 weeks, starting next month. I was discarding the $350 flat rate and demanding a fair market rent of $1,600 plus metered utilities. Caleb slowly shook his head. Mom, how can you do this to us? Victoria had to take an emergency unpaid day off today because you weren't here. Her boss is absolutely furious. And now you're hitting us with a massive rent hike. We're supposed to be saving up for our own house. I looked at my son, feeling a deep wave of maternal sympathy, but an even deeper determination to help him finally grow up. Caleb, I said, keeping my voice entirely level. You guys have lived upstairs for 4 long years. You take luxury vacations to the coast twice a year and drive brand new SUVs. You aren't saving for a house. You're just coasting on my dime. I pay this mortgage out of your father's life insurance and my retirement. I am subsidizing your lifestyle while your wife treats me like an unpaid servant. Caleb swallowed hard. Looking at the table, he knew every single word was the absolute truth. But $1,600 is way too much for us right now, he stammered. Victoria is never going to sign this. She's already saying that if you won't help us out. You're cutting off your own grandbaby. That emotional blackmail didn't stand a chance against me anymore. I stood up and held the door open. That's a choice you two have to make. Caleb, if the lease isn't signed by the 15th, I expect you to find another place to live. He looked at me as if he were seeing the real me for the very first time, and walked upstairs without another word. As expected, Victoria didn't take long to push back. The very next evening, a loud, aggressive knock rattled my front door. The moment I turned the lock, she swept past me into the entryway, waving the lease in the air. Caleb trailed behind her, looking incredibly uncomfortable. This is an absolute joke, she snapped, her voice trembling with sheer indignation. You're trying to price out your own son demanding market rent from family. We brought your grandson to you so you'd actually have something meaningful to do with your time. And this is how you repay us. I calmly closed the heavy door behind them and crossed my arms, leaning back against the wall. I don't need a hobby. Victoria, I have a full life, and I am done being exploited in a home that I pay for. Victoria took a step closer, her eyes narrowing into slits. If you force us to pay this, we are packing up and leaving. And you can take this to the bank the day we walk out that door. You lose access to your grandson. We will cut you out completely. You'll never see him again. It was her ultimate weapon, and she looked completely confident that I would break down, cry, and beg for her forgiveness. but I just looked at her with a cool, detached gaze. If you want to weaponize a child to get free rent and free labor, Victoria, that says everything about who you are. I don't negotiate with threats. You have until the 15th to sign that lease. If you don't, I expect your unit cleared out. Victoria gasped, completely stunned that her ultimate power play had absolutely zero leverage. Caleb gently caught her by the sleeve. Come on, Victoria, let's go. She's serious, he muttered defeatedly. She spun on her heel and stormed out. That very night, I made a definitive choice. I wanted this constant hostility out of my life for good. I picked up my phone and called a dear friend who worked as a top real estate agent in town. My longtime friend Diana came over first thing Thursday morning, while Caleb and Victoria were away at their corporate jobs. We walked through the property together. Diana was incredibly impressed by the curb appeal and the pristine condition of the house. This place is honestly way too much space for you to maintain alone, and the upstairs unit is a perfect turnkey rental property. She told me honestly. I nodded. That was exactly what I was thinking. Over the last few days, I had done some serious homework. I didn't want to sell the family home, but I also didn't want to live right beneath a mountain of daily drama anymore. I had already found a gorgeous, single-story garden apartment with a beautiful balcony overlooking a quiet lake on the edge of town. The rent was incredibly manageable, and I could easily afford it using the rental income from this property. Diana promised to handle everything discreetly. By Friday the 15th, just as I anticipated, there was no signed lease in my mailbox. Instead, an icy, passive-aggressive silence echoed from the top floor. They obviously thought I was bluffing and would cave at the final hour. On Saturday morning, I handed Caleb an official document, sent via certified mail, since no lease had been executed and the previous verbal agreement was terminated. I gave them an official, legally binding 3-month notice to vacate the premises. When Caleb read the paperwork, the color completely drained from his face. He ran upstairs, and seconds later, I could hear Victoria screaming expletives through the floorboards. It finally hit them that I didn't make empty threats. Over the next few weeks, I completely ignored the glaring looks in the driveway. I spent my days peacefully packing up my favorite books and sorting through old keepsakes. Every box I taped up felt like a milestone on my road back to independence. The real wake-up call hit them out of nowhere 2 weeks later on a Saturday afternoon. Diana had scheduled a series of open house viewings for the entire property, as I had officially decided to lease both units to a wonderful, established young family who wanted to rent out the whole house. As the first group of prospective tenants started walking up the shared stairs, Victoria flung her door open. "What is going on here? Who are these random people walking through our space?" she yelled down the stairwell. I stood in the main foyer, looking up at her with complete composure. "These are prospective tenants for the property." "Victoria," I said, my voice echoing clearly. "Since your move-out date is at the end of next month, the entire house is being re-rented. I'm moving out as well." Victoria completely lost her mind. Her need for control was entirely useless now because she no longer owned the board. "You can't do this. We haven't even found an apartment yet. The rental market out there is an absolute nightmare. Where are we supposed to go with a baby?" Caleb stepped out behind her, his face a mask of pure panic. The brutal reality had finally broken through. They had zero savings because they had blown all their income on a high-end lifestyle. And now they were facing a massive time crunch in a cutthroat market. "I gave you a full 3 months," I replied evenly and factually. You had the option to sign the lease. You chose not to. Now. The opportunity has passed. The papers for my new lake apartment are finalized, and this house is going to a lovely new family. The prospective renters looked down awkwardly, and Victoria slammed her door shut with a force that shook the walls. Caleb just stood at the railing, completely paralyzed. He looked like a little boy who had just realized the world didn't revolve around him. The night before the movers arrived, a soft, tentative knock sounded at my door. It wasn't Victoria. It was Caleb. Entirely alone. He looked absolutely beaten down, with dark circles bruising the skin under his eyes. He sat down at my bare kitchen table, surrounded by stacked boxes. "Mom," he started, his voice cracking slightly. "We finally approved an apartment. It's a tiny 2-bedroom, 30 minutes outside the city limits, and it's going to swallow up half my paycheck." Victoria hasn't stopped crying for days. "Can we please just talk about this? Isn't there any way we can stay here? We'll pay the $1,600. We promise." I looked at my son. It pulled at my heart to see him struggle, but I knew that giving in right now would ruin all the progress we had made. "No, Caleb," I said gently, but with absolute finality. This stopped being just about the money a long time ago. This is about basic human respect. You and your wife treated me like a piece of property you could manage and manipulate. I will never allow myself to be treated that way again. Caleb lowered his head, staring at his hands. "I'm so sorry. Mom, I should have spoken up. I just let Victoria run the show, and I went along with it." I placed my hand over his trembling knuckles. "I forgive you, Caleb, but you are a father now. You have to learn how to steer your own ship and provide for your family without relying on your mother's retirement to pay your way." He nodded slowly, a single tear slipping down his cheek. It was a heartbreaking moment, but it was the exact wake-up call he desperately needed to become a man. There were no more dramatic scenes or yelling matches, just the quiet, healing truth. As he walked out, a massive weight lifted off my chest. The transition was complete. My new life was waiting, and I was ready. 3 months later, I am sitting out on the balcony of my new apartment. The view of the quiet lake is absolutely breathtaking, and my sunlit rooms smell faintly of fresh brewed coffee and eucalyptus. My days belong entirely to me again. I go hiking every Monday. I've joined a local pottery studio, and I sink into the deep, uninterrupted peace that fills my new space. The old house is completely taken care of by the new tenants, and that steady, reliable rental income ensures that my retirement is fully secure, comfortable, and completely stress-free. As for Caleb and Victoria, we have a distant but remarkably stable relationship now. There was no instant, fake reconciliation. They had to learn the hard way how to manage their own household and stand on their own 2 feet. Yesterday, they came over to visit my new apartment for the very first time. Victoria was incredibly quiet, almost reverent. She actually brought me a beautiful bouquet of hydrangeas and genuinely complimented the lake view. There was no mention of a childcare calendar, and no entitlement. Instead, Caleb looked at me politely and asked if I might want to join them for a walk through the park this coming Sunday afternoon to see the baby. I smiled and told him I'd love to. I am looking forward to being a proud, doting grandmother this Sunday for exactly 2 hours, entirely on my own terms. Afterwards, I will drive back to my peaceful sanctuary, turn my new lock, and live my beautiful life exactly how I see fit. I drew my boundaries not with loud fights or legal battles, but through quiet, unshakable action. And without a doubt, It was the single best decision I have ever made.